Please welcome Jason to Creative Mornings.
Morning, everyone. So some of you may know I'm actually an architect, but I transitioned as a plant cultivator in the last year. So we run the Plant Society just up the road, and this is a great topic for what we do, both personally as well as with plants. And it's a topic that's often tabooed and not spoken about. And personally, it's been a topic in my family that we always talk about, and from a range of personal scenarios. And it obviously isn't a topic that comes naturally, as everyone would understand as well. But I think it's a healthy thing to kind of confront it on a regular basis. So today we ask ourselves, how do we look at death in a positive way? I mean, people always look at plants and freak out once they're dying and really panic. But when it comes to gardening, I always say, the more plants you kill, the better gardener you become. And I think it's really great. We do a little workshop where people bring their dead plants in and we go through why they're dead. And we often laugh about it. But it's through killing plants that we understand that things are alive. I think we live in a society where everything's so plastic, everything's perfect, and no one likes patina, no one likes damage. The first scratch on a car is always something that you're really nervous about, and afterwards it's like, well, it's going to drive into a wall, it doesn't matter. So it's getting over that hurdle. And so in many ways, plants are like humans, and it's a really good relationship with plants to understand that we live in a world that still relies on the environment. And to an extent, we can't make everything man-made because we still go back down to the basic principles of life. So when it comes to thinking about necessities to survive, or even be happy and even flourish, we have to look at the aspects of life that make us happy. And my transition from architecture to plants is not a normal transition. And it's been interesting seeing a lot of people in the media and also my colleagues go, why the fuck would you drop architecture to work with plants? And it's been interesting, like even the other day someone was like, don't give up architecture, you've still got it in you. But the funny thing is I haven't been happier, and that's for many reasons. And that relationship with plants is a reminder of what is really important to me. So this is our back room, and I've always used plants in the work I do because there's no easy way to soften a space than with a plant. And I love them because you can't control them to a certain extent, as you can't control life. And so these necessities that the plants require are similar to the necessities we all require. And when people say, why would you go with architecture, it's because we have something in our minds that sets us in a way where we have to be architects, or we have to be doctors. And I water people's plants and people go, they feel sorry for me. It's really funny. Because they don't associate me with the Plant Society either. So that, oh, you're watering my plants, do you want me to get you a coffee? Because people don't see, there's a typical career path, and if you sway from that, people judge you, and I guess you judge yourself for doing something different. And so as humans, we're clouded by the judgment of life and death. And whereas plants you find are more adaptable, so they'll adapt with their climate and they'll evolve with their climate. Whereas to an extent, because of our man-made environment, he actually didn't know whether they would survive, and the idea of splitting them up was a survival thing. At least some of the family would survive. Fortunately, they all survived, and so he had 10 children here, and there's 30 grandchildren, and something that was a big reminder for us is, although I do come from an Asian heritage, my grandpa's main thing about life was that there were no presents, and we just had to spend time together and have dinners together. And that was something that really made him happy. And he didn't care whether one grandchild was a garbo, whereas one was a doctor. For him, it was that relationship that he really valued. And it's something that's really carried through what I do with friends and also family. That we don't talk about money. I hate talking about money. Because I think that stops you from doing a lot of things. And it also affects your relationship with people once you start talking about money. And my father he's been quite blunt in his life and the way he's brought us up. He basically said to us, the relationship on a daily basis with him was more important than celebrating his funeral. And he basically said, I wouldn't even know you came to shout on my gravestone. So put the effort into our relationship. So we've always had this discussion about life and death, and when we start thinking about that, it makes you think. So the way you kind of start living is saying that I'm here and I'm alive, and I will die. And so it's something that always comes up.
One to say that there is always a middle. Like, there's a path that everyone chooses, directs you in, but there's always the middle. And the middle for me was actually creating my own middle, becoming a plant cultivator and dealing with plants. But it was through actually witnessing these bad experiences that made me go, what do I not like about my life? And how do I change these bad experiences and pass through into not feeling like a failure, but actually creating a role that I was completely happy with. So when Nathan and I set up the Plant Society, it was the unknown. But to many, looking back, we actually wanted to go back down to the basic principles. We basically wanted to go have conversations with the community. So we set up the Plant Society to reinterpret the old school storefront. A storefront where people could come in and ask questions and not buy anything. They could tell me their horrible plant stories, and we could help them. Even 50% of the calls we get on the phone and the emails and people who come in, they always start by saying, I don't want to bother you. And that line really makes me think that as a society we're quite insulated, because we shouldn't feel bad about asking questions and we shouldn't feel bad interacting. And that leads me into, there's a whole set of rules that we seem to have created, and we do have a lot of commercial clients and they've got a lot of rules for us in terms of liability and the way we're meant to act or what we're meant to do. And there was a scenario where I was on site and I just said, fuck your rules, there's too many rules, we can't do anything. To the point where it was a rule around, this can't be this width because a child will slip on it, or someone could kill someone with this, and I was like, but you've got a restaurant here and they've got knives. So if they wanted to, they would do it. And it was really impacting the way they were designing, because there were so many rules around, you couldn't have stone, you couldn't have hard surfaces. But then they were forgetting, because they'll focus on the rules, and just the creativity had died in terms of they couldn't really design to the fullest, because every time a designer came up with an idea, they're like, oh, someone's going to slip on that and die. And it took me to walk in and go, you've got a water feature, someone could drown in that. That they go, actually, our rules are shit, so let's reinterpret those rules, because they didn't even like it themselves. So this brings me on to the death of society. And it's one that really bugs me, and that's what we use to actually, in everything we do with the plant society. And I see a few faces we've dealt with, and we always try to have a relationship with all our clients. And it's quite a transparent relationship. I mean, when self-service checkouts came out, they were amazing because you didn't have to talk to anyone. But now we're going batshit crazy because we can't talk to anyone. And it reminds me of, we travelled to America and we met some plant people, and we still have open conversations with these plant people. And we've had really great stories with them. And there were two stories I took away from one in New York, where it's okay to work with your partner, because back when we were village people, you naturally would be a city of blacksmiths, you would be a city of gardeners. So it was okay to share that knowledge between each other, and that's what made it richer and built up those crafts. And the other thing I took away from another chat with someone else was, down to the core of everything we do, we really require conversation. And I think we've forgotten that, and you kind of take the conversation of cavemen used to sit around and tell stories. We still like stories, we just modernise the stories. And then it made me think, why do people love Kim Kardashian so much? Because it's a story. And so why can't we have those stories on a daily basis with the people who live in our community? And that's something we really do in the shop. Like, we have people come into the shop for a whole range of reasons. Sometimes it's because they've had a horrible day and they just need to sit there. So they sit there, and that's completely fine. And that's not bothering us at all, so we can still do our work, and we can also check in with them to see if they're okay. And so kind of breaking that mould of the death of society and reinterpreting it again. We're fortunate to be based in Collingwood, where that still exists to a certain extent, but there are some cities. I was just in Sydney CBD last week talking about how do we build community with Westfield, out of all people. And even they notice that there's a death of society, and that they're not really linking in with the Opera House, which is right there, the Botanic Gardens. We're all separate institutes that don't feed back into another. And to an extent, they acknowledge too that we're a dead society. They're creating these shopping centres that don't give back. And they're trying to bring life back into it and think outside the box. Like, we're talking about having the opera in Westfield. And we're talking about bringing in the Botanic Gardens and doing installations within the shopping centre, and making it a place to congregate rather than a place to shop. The shopping will come once people feel comfortable. And so in those scenarios too, rather than weigh themselves down with the bad experiences, tenants getting angry that they're not making money, and taking the money out of it and saying, how do we give back to the community and actually embrace people rather than products. And so we learn from, the self-service checkout is great because we've learned what doesn't work. I don't think we all can look at things and say, that was a fuck up, don't know what to do, and paralyze ourselves. Whereas I look at mistakes as a really valuable thing. As an architect, you would make a lot of mistakes, and the only way you learn was actually going through those mistakes. And as a designer, doctors make mistakes, and that's how they learn. That's why there are procedures in place to stop that from happening. And that goes with life too, so you will make mistakes. I made the mistake of telling myself that I had to be an architect, and my dad on the other side was like, what are you doing? Like, why do you need to be an architect? You can do whatever you want. And he's always said, you can actually go collect garbage if it makes you happy, then great. Because there's no point bogging yourself down, because he's like, well, you might as well be dead because you're not actually enjoying your day to the fullest. And that brings me on to, when I was 18, I went backpacking through Africa. And I didn't tell my parents I was doing it. I rang them at the airport. And I spent 3 months there, and it was kind of it ended up being me finding more about myself and what about life I really wanted. And I started journey with a backpack full of stuff. And in the end, it got too heavy, so I kept giving it away. So I started in Cape Town and I ended up in Egypt, and I went through Sudan and all these places. And it was a constant reminder that there were all these people in villages that didn't have a lot of money, but they were so happy because they had their family around them. And anyone, like all my cousins and anyone young around me, I do really say, go away and actually see what other people are experiencing. Like Jeremy and I had to laugh about, as an architect, I was dealing with multi-million-dollar clients who said, oh, I need my second dining table by Christmas. And I was like, you got a table for 30 people, you don't need another one. And so kind of looking at life in a different way and saying, for me to actually survive and be happy, do I really need everything that the world currently is telling me I want? Or do we go back to the basic principles and say, to be happy, I just need to have a conversation once a day, or I need to do the simple things rather than try to overcomplicate life. I think that we do overcomplicate life. We're dealing with a lot of retailers now who go, oh, like, why isn't this working, or what should I do? I was like, you just made it too complicated. They're like, oh, we'll get people to just use technology and they can click on this and go to this and then do this and upload this. I was like, they're not going to do that. It's just too complicated. So how do you make it easier for people to do things and go back to the basics? And then also seeing, and I think having this conversation about death constantly is looking at it in a positive way. So this is an artist, Japanese artist, who looks at challenging tradition, and so freezing flowers and also bonsais and swaying away with what is meant to be. And trying to challenge that idea of death is really important for them. And so the biggest lesson I've learned is too often we give ourselves titles. I'm an architect, a doctor, a cleaner, or a gardener, all of which society has given their own stereotypes on every profession. You know, people will look at me and go, oh, you're an architect, that's amazing. But really deep down, on a daily basis, it wasn't amazing. And I was actually sitting in the cafe we're in, hearing a conversation about how unhappy someone was about being an architect, but feeling like he had to be. And that actually, because it connected with me, it did really upset me, because I think we as a society push ourselves in that way of, he didn't feel alive. He was choosing between his family, and he had 2 young children, his family and his job, and he had chosen his job. And those years with his children he will never get back. And it's something that everyone says, but we take for granted, I think. And so the biggest lesson I've learned through this journey is to go with your gut. And a lot of the time my gut was saying, this scenario is shit, but let's just keep doing it because that's what I'm meant to do. And to a certain extent, 2 years ago, I wasn't living my life. I was actually really bogged down. And then it pushed me over the edge when another scenario happened. I went through another firm and I could still see little aspects of me slipping back into being like soulless. And so that's what really made me, it was my friends and family kind of pushed me towards this kind of direction. And for me that was life, and I had been gardening since I was 10, but I had never seen it as a profession. I still laugh that I'm dealing with plants on a daily basis and that it can actually keep me busy every day. So I think those experiences that I went through, that experience of being soulless and not really interacting with society anymore, and ideally that idea of death, once you kind of push yourself that far, like a plant would do, you kind of naturally push yourself the other way and try to look at life in a different perspective. And so I would say, this is a really great image of when you actually propagate plants and when you cut them up into nothing and they're trying so hard to survive. And this actually sums up my life at the moment, where you do look at life in a different way and go, actually it's okay to water people's plants, or, you know, I do more than that, but I make it seem like that. I just water people's plants. and there's nothing wrong with it. Like I had an old boss, I look after his plants, an old boss who, one of the bad experiences, and I still look after his plants because I believe that you can't just cut negativity. And there's so many things that, as plant people now, people go, oh, you should be vegan, you should do that, you know. You get put into a box where you should be holistically good to the environment, but we can't bog ourselves down with all those things because we would never get anywhere, and it's slow steps. So some of my friends go, why are you watering his plants? He was like, you know, that office was horrible to you. But if I don't make a presence in that environment, then they will never change because they can't see the other side. And that's like, you know, commercial projects too, where I have a big thing against retail because there's so much wastage in retail and it's bad for the environment. But we've managed to convince them to not use fake plants to start with, and then next year we might get them to do something else. But if we just push them aside, then that wouldn't change. So we're slowly getting in there. And we're trying to break up years of bad habits and bring life back into it. So we had a project in Perth that had all live plants, which was amazing, and they can see that now. So we're now going through some of the other projects and getting rid of fake plants and bringing, you know, trying to resuscitate what we've actually ruined, which is really nice. So I'll leave you with that image because that will hopefully inspire you. Yeah, so when you're really down in that death arena, then you'll really actually appreciate where you can go. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jason. We have around 5 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to pick Jason's brains on anything, just throw your hands up. Anyone have anything? I'm curious, can you just give us a bit of an idea of like how you made the transition from architecture to, you know, your own practice here?
I actually never wanted to, which is really funny. As a getaway, I still go to a really close family parents' house in the country. And I always garden with Jane because her children don't like gardening with her. And she's got a hobby farm, so she always needs help. So we were in the garden and she said, well, why don't you do something with plants because you're still not 100% happy with what you're doing now. And I just laughed. I said, for me, it's actually calming to be gardening. And I used to garden before work and after work. That was my thing. It was a buffer. So I didn't ever see it as the whole day because it would make it into a job. And then we walked into the house and my partner Nathan, all my friends were sitting there going, you're fucking doing something with plants. We will help. They were like, we will help you. And I said, okay, we'll do one thing. And that was curating what we called the Plant Social. So it was our first event to bring gardeners together because I had tried so hard to do stuff with the Botanic Gardens and old garden clubs. And they were so proud that it was a 10-year wait to become a volunteer. And I was like, that's 10 years of your knowledge we're going to lose. So what? And I tried to do younger initiatives to say, if you're under 30, like the MTC, can you buddy up with someone older? And they were just hesitant to change. So then we started the Plant Social because I wanted to bring the interaction from gardening back because I learnt gardening from my grandparents and from my family. And so we tried to bring that back in. And so we launched the event and we had so many people there that we ended up doing it every month and then every 2 weeks and then every week. And I was still working full time until 6 months ago. And we were doing fit outs at 5 a.m. in the morning and I'd be at work at 9. And it was getting too much. And it was actually Paul and Hamish from Hecka Guthrie who were very supportive when I was working there. And it was a really great environment for me. And they just said, get out of here and do your thing. And, you know, they said, oh, well, if it all fucks up, you know, that's Paul saying that. If it all goes to shit, you've got a job here, so come back. And so that's really what highlighted the fact that I could do what I was doing. Yeah.
Any questions?
There's one up the back.
Yep, up the back. No? Come on. Yes.
Mentioned the project.
Yeah. What was that?
Yeah,
So it was a Westfield, and we've been talking to them for 6 months. So a lot of the things we do are months of conversation before we even do anything. And everyone says, "Why don't you charge them?" And I'm like, "You can't charge someone to talk to them." And so we were actually meant to start a project in March in Victoria on curating the experience, so the retail experience, and trying to bring life back into it. Like, we all walk into shopping centres and it's this spiral. And if you don't all know, back in like the 80s to 90s and early 2000s, shopping centres and casinos were designed in a way so that you couldn't get out. Like, we've all had that experience. And the idea behind that was trap them so they can shop and they can gamble. But I think we're smarter than that now, and retail is finding that too, that the fact that we're smarter and we can find our way out. And so now they're like, well, actually at the core of everything we do, people want to dine, they want to have experiences. So they're starting to overhaul everything they're doing globally, and they want to create those experiences. So a part of that overhaul in Perth as an experiment was, I just said, your lease lines are shit because it's too corporate. When you look at old shop fronts, and it still happens in Collingwood, and that what they made would flat out into the street and it would engage people to walk in. And so we use planting in a way to stop people, because we're also in a habit of walking. We just keep walking naturally. So we put plants in a way to stop people, to stop for a moment. And there were scenarios where they're like, "Oh, we want more, we want more." And I was like, "No, you don't need more, because that's actually going to get overwhelming for people." And so we use live planting in a way to kind of stop people from walking in a circle, and to actually interact with the landscaping. Yeah, because they put a whole park through this food court, which is really great. And it was modelled, it's nothing like the High Line. They were inspired by the High Line, so they've got a long way to go, and they acknowledge that. But there's children's parks in there, water features where, because it's hot, you can put your feet in. So they took those aspects of the High Line and reinterpreted it, which is really great. Yeah.
Who was that last question up there? Yes.
What's your favourite plant and why?
So it depends on the day. I've got 400 plants in the house. So my favourite plant is still devil's ivy, just because it is so adaptable. I've kind of categorised a few plants as icebreaker plants for people who are really scared of gardening. And I forgot to touch upon, people are so scared of gardening that they don't even try because they're scared of killing a plant. And that's why it's like, kill the plant because you will learn from it. And then we give them icebreaker plants. So the icebreaker plants are Monstera, devil's ivy, and peace lilies, because when they've gone too long without water, they droop, and you water them and they come back. But it's a visual reminder to you that you need to look after things that are alive, set an adjustment. And so that a month later, people come back in for harder plants to look after. Yeah.
Let's give another hand to Jason. Thank you very much.